So if we're in a room, we take a nice blank wall and we draw lines. You might call them swim lanes, horizontal swim lanes. And this is an example of what we're showing on the screen. And you can see that horizontally across, we've got all of our primary, archetypes, our characters with their names, what they do. And then vertically, you'll see that we've got a number of chapters or acts. In a movie structure, you might have major, act 1, act 2, act 3. I tend to sort of frame discovery or engaging or starting work as the first act, and then using the current state solution that's in place today, or the frame or the system, whatever they're using today to complete their job. And then usually the third act or the last act is, wrapping up or assessing where they are, or, handing off or reporting out or wrapping up. Those are usually the start points to try to inspire this group to then fill in the blanks. And the first thing I like to do is say, how does this story end? And say what, at the end of the day, after this collection of characters has done their work, or at the end of a process, what's the outcome from it? And it can be a great outcome, or it can be, this didn't go the way we planned. So we put a sticky on, applicable swim lanes where that sort of final scene happens. It's important for this group to be honest. We're not looking for a happy ending necessarily.
It's not a happy path necessarily.
Yeah, it may not, there may be happy moments, but, it's real life today. This is how it is. And then I back up from there. Okay, we have our end state in mind. We know where our story ends. Now let's start at the beginning. And if we have a good enough group in the room, and this is another opportunity where we can divide and conquer. We can actually, it's usually the same groups, the same breakouts that we formed to come up with the initial archetypes. We have them sort of get together and create what their story is for a day in the life of that particular, archetype, character, if you will. And then we see what each group comes up with. And chances are there's going to be some intersections. I did this job throughout the day and I struggled in these particular areas and I delivered this final output at the end of the day. And that's going to map up with some of what the other archetypes or characters came up with. And so on the wall, we'll line them all up and then we'll kind of build a master journey map where we see touch points and intersections. So this example we're showing you is, in several horizontals, you can see where the various characters are interrelating with each other. Now, in my experience, where they interrelate or where they connect or where they communicate or however they interact with each other is typically where you'll find the most opportunity for change and improvement. And what we ask the groups to do is use a red sticky anytime something doesn't go right, where there's a gap. One of these examples, one of the archetypes is having trouble, communicating with colleagues. And then in another example, there's a sort of a cumbersome process or a tedious process to fill in information. In another, there's, confusion among groups on what next to do in a particular, process. So we want to call those out. We want those to be obvious because we're going to stand back from this at the end and see where the pain is. It's kind of a heat map if you think about it.
Do we add future state? We've done, I think, that in some cases, right? Where if they're looking to build something new, they almost want a future state kind of map either added to it or separate.
So that depends. And I think that right at this stage of the game, we're trying to, look at the way today is so that we can start to think about. A lot of times you come to this, especially in an immersion, where people haven't really visualized what they want the future to be yet. And to get to the future, there needs to be some constraints on what they create. Otherwise, they'll just create something all over the map. So I think at this stage of the journey in an immersion, we try to keep them in today so that we can pinpoint the areas where the problem that we've identified in day one manifests itself. So I tend to recommend at this stage that we stay in the current state and then later we get to the future. So that pretty much gets us through the second day. This journey mapping process, sometimes depending on the complexity of it, can take all afternoon. So we, and initially it's messy and we clean it up and we get it to a pretty good state. So that's pretty much day two in a nutshell.